we're having some sort of problem with an electrical panel, and the result of that is that we don't have any hot water for our bathrooms, for showers, or for washing our hands and everything. And it reminds me of how mortification, self-abnegation, was something that St. Ignatius would encourage in those that followed him. Granted, we have to be careful because he had so entered into mortification and into penances in the early part of his conversion that he found himself later in his life perhaps with a body that was damaged by the things that he had done to himself in that radical sort of self-mortification. So he always wanted a balance in that so that the person's physical health would not be challenged by the things that he was doing in self-abnegation and mortification. However, that being said, he certainly never turned his back on the need for that. In fact, in somewhat humorous way, he would invite people who stopped by to see him before the midday meal. He would invite them to eat, saying, if you want to mortify yourself, please stay with us and have dinner with us. And apparently the table was such that it really was a mortification to eat with the Jesuits of that time, something that we've been trying to repair ever since. But the mortification and the self-abnegation that Ignatius would recommend would be things like fasting, as long as it didn't, impair the health of a person. He would recommend too going on pilgrimages, because when you went on pilgrimages, you had to beg, you had to depend on other people. Traveling at that time was an exhausting and difficult enterprise, and probably a little dangerous. And so the person who would go on a pilgrimage, and so the person also who was fasting, would be more likely to turn to God and ask for the strength, ask for the help that one needed. And in that, abnegation and mortification is perhaps most beautifully fruitful in our spiritual lives, is that we turn to the Lord more. We break out of our routine where we pretty much have everything under control that we can have under control. And we enter into an experience of showering with cold water, eating less, doing something that perhaps is somewhat disagreeable to us, but adopting that for at least a while. And we do that, and it breaks that routine, and it forces us to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? And then we throw ourselves more on God's mercy and love, saying, I do this because I want to be more conscious of God, and I want to appreciate more the gifts that God has given to me. It was an important part of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. He wrote about it in those exercises. It was an important part of his life. He himself probably didn't have to do a large amount of that, because the illnesses that he suffered from were so constant and so painful that probably getting through each day when he was able to was its own mortification. But for us who perhaps have life a little easier, it's probably good to pay attention to what he encouraged the early Jesuits to do, to open themselves to God in a generosity that limited some of the things that they could have enjoyed, and then put a limit on them so that they could think more of God, and out of the routine of their daily lives become more aware of the presence of God and those many gifts that God had given to them. And that's the wisdom of St. Ignatius for today.